So stigmas. Now this is something new on the exams. We haven't had that before, but basically they want you to know the difference between the stigmas and between the defects, right? Two different things. So a stigma is something that subjective on everybody's opinions. So have you ever seen listings that actually they advertise them as a murder homes? There's a website just for that. It's interesting. It shows you all the murder homes, right, where the murders happen. Stigmas, it could be all the things that some people will be okay with and some people will not be okay with this. So if it's a sexual offender or the serial killer who lived on that property, that could be a stigma. And some people say, I don't want to live in that house, right? Or some people say, I don't care, right? If there's a death on the property, some people are very sensitive and they don't want to live in the property if anybody dies in it. But for some people, again, they don't care, right? So that's why it means subjective opinion. So everybody has an opinion towards stigma houses, right? So it's up to you, like if the house is haunted. If it comes with a ghost, would you be happy to live in a house like this? And I'm sure some of you said, oh, sure, let's do this. And somebody like me who freaks out of everything, right? Then probably not. So stuff like this. So stigmas, you have to know it's a subjective. So you cannot tell because of the stigma if the price will go up or down. Because maybe the haunted price will sell for more just because there's a ghost in there, you know? But if somebody dies in the property, if somebody got killed in the property, maybe the house is not going to sell for as much, but it's all based on the person who wants to buy it, right? So it's not up to, it's not like a set price that could be set up for this. But my question is, should the seller disclose this information? So if you know that somebody got killed on this property and you're trying to sell this property as a seller, should you disclose that information? Is that a must? If they specifically ask you for that, and if they specifically ask you, did anybody ever died on this property? Then of course you have to disclose. But if nobody asks you for that, then of course you don't have to say nothing when it comes to stigmas, because that's kind of a personal thing. It's not like a latent effect, right? So you get the point in here. Effect is objective. So you see the difference on exam, they'll ask you, what's the difference between the stigmas and defect? Defect is the actual defect. So if you have a crack in the foundation, if you have a sloping floor, or whatever that is a defect. And because of that, the house, it is objective. So that means you know how much it's going to cost to replace that stuff. And we all know how much it will depreciate the property for. But when it comes to stigmas, as I said, it's subjective. Some people love it, some people hate it. So it all depends on the buyer who wants to buy the property, what they want to offer based on stigmas. Okay, question 14. We have Anna. Is interested in purchasing Elizabeth House. In the attempt to save money, instead of hiring the licensed home inspector, Anna thoroughly inspects Elizabeth House herself and does not find any defects or deficiencies. After the sale completes, Anna discovers a major issue with the foundation of the house that will cost her $55,000 to fix. Don't save money on the inspectors. As a result, Anna sues Elizabeth for failing to disclose the issue with the foundation. Which of the following statement is true? So now, the best way to work through those questions is kind of, I would say, go back through the answers first and see what they refer to and think how they want you to think. Because she did not hire the inspector, right? Remember the caveat emptor, so basically the buyer be aware of things. As a buyer, she is responsible to hire somebody who is an expert in inspection, somebody who can point out different things to her. As the owner of the house, Elizabeth also responsible to disclose to her if she knows of any latent defect. And the foundation could be a latent defect because it's found later, but maybe it's not a latent defect. And you see what I mean by this? They don't specify instead of the question saying, oh, it's crack in the foundation, right? And they just say major issue. We don't know what type of issue. They don't specify. So it could be a patent defect or it could be a latent defect. So that's just based on the question. But let's go back through the answers and then we'll know what they referred to. So we'll use the method of elimination here. So if I just look at option 4, because it's the shortest answer, it says the foundation issue is known as the property stigma. Now, definitely that's a true or false. It's definitely a false statement. Just because the foundation, now stigma is something, it's haunted, somebody get killed, has nothing to do with the foundation stuff. So that's not it. So we have 3 left. Okay, what's the next one? Is the short one. Option 2, Elizabeth would only be required to disclose this defect if Anna specifically asked about the foundation. Only be required to disclose. Now, that's referring to stigma, because with stigma, you're only required to disclose it only if they ask you for this. So if they specifically come to your house and says, you know what, can you tell me if anybody got killed on this property? Then you have to respond and say, yeah, actually, I killed my mom here. I'm joking, but right. So that would be a stigma. When it comes to disclosure of the seller, they have to disclose always about the latent effects. So if they're aware of some of them, right, not when it's been asked, but they're supposed to give the right away to the buyers and say, hey, I know about this latent effect, if they know about it, right? So for that reason, option 2 is out. Option 1, because the deficiency in the foundation is a major issue, Elizabeth is liable to Anna, even if she did not know about the defect. This is what the problem is. If she did not know about the defect, you can't sue the seller for that. So if nobody knew about it, they lived in a house and nobody knew that there was a defect in there, then you can't come after me for that. Right? So that's something that you have to know about the latent effects. You can't sue the sellers if they were unaware of that defect. And number 3 has to be the answer. So it says Anna claims against Elizabeth for failing to disclose the foundation issue will likely fail if it can be shown that any qualified home inspector would have identified the issue. So basically blaming it on the buyer, says you should have hired the inspector. That's what they try to say, and will likely to fail. You see how nice and soft they said it? It's not like a strong statement, so that's good. Okay, question 15. Under the rules, which must a listed licensee do if the seller instructs them to withhold the disclosure of the material latent defect to a potential buyer of the property? So my question to you, if you're working for the seller and you're trying to sell the property and the seller comes to you and says, you know what, zip, don't talk about my leaky roof. Don't talk about my issues. what are you supposed to do in this case? You know what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to walk away. That's how they want you to know that for the exam. So if the seller tells you not to talk about something, not disclose something, we are the highest duty we have not to decline, but to the public. That's how our job is. And if we're aware of something, and if the seller tells us something, and they tell us not to say something, they say, I'm sorry, but I don't want to get sued. I have to disclose. If you tell me that information, if I'm aware of this information, I have to disclose that to people. So because the highest duty of care I have is to the public. Okay, so let's look at the options here. The listing licensee must follow the seller's instructions and withhold disclosure to potential buyers. You don't do that, right? You do follow the seller's instructions, but only if they are legit, if this is kind of like a legal thing to do. They tell you not to disclose something that might potentially hurt the buyer, right? And when they say material latent effect, material means that it is going to cause the buyer money. Okay, so if he knows, then he has to disclose. So for that reason, that's definitely false. The listing licensee must refuse to provide the further trading services to or on behalf of that client in respect to the trade in real estate. So that's what they're aiming for, and you have to know what they want to hear from you on the exam. Okay, so how do you terminate the contract? We already know about the offer release, but what happens now? If somebody does not perform what they're supposed to do, so if you hire somebody to fix your roof and they slept on that roof, then then you can you can fire them. If mutual agreement between the two parties, so two parties agree mutually, says, hey, you don't want to sell me your car, and I don't want to buy your car, so that's fine. Non-fulfillment of the conditions, so somebody in real estate we put conditions subject to financing, subject to inspection, subject to title search, and if one of those conditions that don't go through, so if your financing doesn't go through, or you did not like what you found in the inspection, then of course you can just walk away from that contract. If somebody breached the contract, breach is when they do some wrongful actions, right? So that roofer, was he supposed to fix the roof? Yes, he was supposed to do, right? And if he haven't done it, and it's because of him, he didn't do it, then it becomes the breach. So my question is, what if he did not fix the roof because there was a lightning, and the lightning hit the roof and the house caught on fire, and he couldn't fix it because of that? Is that still a breach of contract? Did he breach it? Did he do it because of his actions? He couldn't fix the roof? You see, it has not. So if it happens by nature, then it's not a breach of contract. But if because of him, he was lazy, he slept instead of fixing it, then that becomes the breach of the contract. So breach of the contract is caused by a person who is in that contract, right? So that's what it is. And then we have a frustration. So frustration is what we're going to spend time on. We're going to talk about the frustration and the common mistake. So two things you must know for the exam. So you have to know the difference between the common mistake and frustration. Okay, so look what happens. On June 5th, you sign the contract. You sign the contract, I'm going to buy your house, okay? Agreement is made, everything is good, right? Consideration, it's all good. It's all legally done so far, okay? But unaware to both of you, okay? You sign the contract, but unaware to both of you, something happened to the house on June 4th, it caught on fire, and none of you guys knew, because that house that you're trying to buy is somewhere far, right? It's on the island. So what happens then? If something happens to the house before the contract was signed, then that's called a common mistake. And if mistake happens, then of course you don't have to buy a contract, you don't have to buy a house, the contract will be void, okay? So that's what they're referring to. But what if you sign the contract on June 5th, both of you agreeing to buy the house, and on June 6th, so after the contract was signed, the house catches on fire, okay? And it burns down to the ground, and there's nothing for you to buy anymore. So that becomes a frustration. Frustration comes after the contract is signed. So how do you remember this? My students always remember that as alphabetically. C for common mistake comes before frustration, right? You just remember that. So C comes before F. So if C comes before F, C is for common, F is for frustration, right? So then common has to happen before the contract is signed, and frustration is after, right? After. But of course, before the completion date. Completion date is when you transfer the title for the money, and if anything happens after the completion date, then of course, buyer will be responsible for that property. But we're talking about things that can happen before you buy the house. Okay, so we know the common mistake. Common happens when? It happens before you sign the contract. So that's wonderful. So both make mistake about the fundamental terms of the contract, okay? So that's what just happened. Mutual mistake. Now, what is a mutual mistake? So now that is an innocent mistake. So something that happened without you planning it, you're not trying to hurt anybody, it just happened. So if I said, you know what, let's meet up in the coffee shop, and I said, let's meet up in Starbucks on Robson Street. You know how many Starbucks we have down there? I go to one, you go to a totally different one. We both made a mistake, but the mistake is different. That's pretty much it. So it's innocent mistake. It's nobody's trying to hurt anybody. So think of it this way. Unilateral mistake is something that's been planned. That's not a good one. It's a deceit. It's a fraud. Deceit is fraud, right? So one party is mistaken and the other party is aware but does nothing about it. So he does it on purpose. So if you see that I'm selling you a piece of land, as a developer, I have a lot of pieces of land, and you look at it and says, oh, she's selling me a larger lot than what I'm supposed to buy, and she's charging me a price for a small lot. Perfect. You saw the mistake. You did nothing about the mistake. You didn't tell me about the mistake, and you still signed the contract. So that's called a unilateral mistake. So there's some type of fraud involved. There's some type of deceit involved. So it's not. So it's easy to recognize those two. So if any mistake happens, what happens to the contract? The contract will be void. Good job. Okay. How do you cancel the contract? So the contract could be void could be voidable, illegal, and unenforceable. So for the exam, you have to know what is a voidable contract. If they ask you what is a voidable contract, that's the easiest mark on the exam, is the contract that has an option to be canceled by someone. So that means you have something in the term says, yeah, I'm allowed to void it, right? So it has an option to cancel. If it's void, that's done. That means it's never existed. Illegal, that means there's some terms in there that is illegal, and you know what happens when I ask you to sell me your car with all of your drugs in it, right? So you can't really enforce that contract. Right? And unenforceable, so that means there's nothing you can do to enforce it against the other person, like an infant, remember? You can't enforce it against an infant. Question 16, true or false? Frustration can only occur after the contract is being made. C comes before F. F is after, so that is a true statement, right? Remember that? Frustration happens after the contract is signed, so that's perfect. As long as you're looking for that keyword after, that's good. True, false? Frustration occurs where both parties to the contract have made a fundamental mistake about the contract, but each make a different mistake. I go to one Starbucks, you go to the other Starbucks. Is that a frustration? That is an innocent mistake. That's a mutual mistake. Okay, so now let's talk about remedies. So what can you do when somebody breaches the contract? So go back to the story. I want to buy your car for $30,000. You told me, Yada, I will accept your offer, but I have to move next week. So make sure that you buy the car, you pick it up before the next week. And I said, sure, I'll do that. But then instead of picking up your car, I go and I buy somebody else's car. How do you feel now? You're probably mad. You're probably not really happy with me right now, right? You're probably frustrated and says, look, I told you I have to move. And I already refused the other buyers. So I breached your contract, right? I breached the contract with you. So if you take me in front of the judge, what do you think the judge will tell me? Based on the common law, that's the most commonly used law when somebody breaches the contract, the judge will award the damages and says, here, we'll get money from you, right, for your damages. And you probably will accept this because that makes sense, right? So anybody who breaches the contract, the usual remedy will be damages. And they saying that the injured party, which is you, right, does have a duty to mitigate the damages as soon as possible. So they're trying to say, don't wait for too long. Don't wait until you have a lot of damage happen to you, right? Or until you lose a lot of money. Try to keep your losses at your minimum. Try to recover that as soon as possible. But what if I was buying something else? What if I was buying a beautiful castle? And I said, I've been looking for that type of mansion for a long time, and there's nothing else just like this. And if you come in front of the judge and the judge says, sure, we can sue them for damages if they breach your contract, if they don't want to sell you that castle anymore. And he says, no, I don't want money. I don't want money. I want that specific castle. I've been looking for that. So if the property is unique and there's absolutely nothing just like that, then you say, judge, I don't want money. I want that castle. And they breached the contract on me. They said they're going to sell it, and now they walked away on me. So then the judge can go towards the equitable law. And the equitable law is the law of fairness, and that's when the judge can add extra free remedies, right? So now he says, okay, I can specifically tell them to sell you that property, right? So to finish that contract with you. So specifically tell them what to do. That's a specific performance, right? Then we have the injunction, mandatory injunction, and the quantum merit. For the exam, you have to know what is a mandatory injunction. All the other things we already covered in chapter 1. So injunction by itself is when the judge tells you what not to do. So if you punch somebody, then the judge will say, stay away from that person. You have an injunction. Stay away 300 meters or something like that, right? So that's an injunction. But a mandatory injunction, can you highlight this one? Okay, is when the judge tells you what to do. So it's opposite from the injunction. Mandatory injunction is when it's kind of the same as specific performance, right? They tell you what to do. Quantum merit, as much as you deserve. So if you did not specify how much you want for your services and they haven't paid you, then the judge will figure out how much to pay you, right? Quantum merit. Question 18, Raj and Linda. Enter into the contract of purchase and sale where Raj agrees to sell his house to Linda. On the date of completion, Raj decides that he no longer wants to sell his house. Therefore, he refuses to sign the documents to transfer the title to Linda. Now, did he breach the contract? Oh, yes, he did. Linda still wants to purchase Raj's house, and she sues Raj for breach of the contract. Linda obtains a court order requiring Raj to complete the sale agreed to in the contract. This order is correctly described as which of the following? You get the point, right? You see what happens? So the judge said that he is required to complete the transaction, so that becomes your specific performance, right? So that's what's happening. Okay, which of the following statement is true with respect to damages for breach of contract? Okay, option 1, a completely innocent party is not required to mitigate his or her damages. So what happened to you? You had to move. You were supposed to sell the car to me, and I just walked away on you, right? Even though you can sue me for damages, but you still have to mitigate your damages as soon as possible. So don't wait for too long. Don't let the damage occur and make it more for yourself, right? So try to do it as soon as possible. When it says not required to mitigate, that is a false statement. You have to try to mitigate. You try to recover your money as soon as possible, right? Take me to court sooner than later. So because it says not required, that's a false statement. Damage awards are intended to punish the party who breaches the contract. Do you think the whole court system is created to punish people? Don't you think it's a bit strong of a keyword, punish? It's definitely not to punish, right? So punish is a bit too much, and that's probably going to make it as a false statement, but let's read the other options. If the parties to the contract provide for the genuine pre-estimate of the foreseeable damages in the contract, that amount will be enforceable, even if the actual loss is lower or higher. Ooh, that's a lot of information. It sounds good, but let's skip this one. Let's go for the last one. At common law, damages can only be awarded for the breach of the condition. Breach of the condition or breach of the contract? And not only, right? So hopefully you see a lot of keywords in here. What do you mean? So we can have damages for other things too, right? Usually it's used for the breach of the contract, not a condition. So for that reason, option 4 is definitely out. So based on methods of elimination, I know 1 is definitely out. Punishment sounds too harsh. 3, it's not a condition, and it's not only. Do you see my keywords? So option 3, let's read this one again, but that should be a true statement. So if the parties to the contract provide for a genuine pre-estimate of the foreseeable damages in the contract. So let's talk about this stuff. So basically I said, look, if I don't buy your car, I'll pay you $500 no matter what, okay? So I put some pre-estimate of foreseeable damage, okay? So something happens. So I'll put that damage into the contract. That amount will be enforceable even if the actual loss is lower or higher. So it doesn't matter how much the loss is, you still consume it for more, but that $500 will go towards you because it's in the contract and it's stated that pre-estimate of a damage that will be given to you no matter what. Do you see the point? So it's kind of a hard question, and that's why a lot of times we show you the hardest question here on the slides. When you do quizzes, they're not as hard, right? So, but we want you to start thinking and kind of try to find those keywords. Okay, this is the last part. One of the last parts. So there's a little bit more left, and that's it, I promise. So the doctrine of privity. When they're referring to doctrine of privity, it says it's only the parties to the contract that have the right to sue or be sued under it. So basically what they're trying to say is this. It is only you and me who sign in the contract that I will buy your car for $30,000, you will sell it to me, right? So who are the parties to this contract? It's only me and you, right? So only both of us. We can sue each other, and your mom or your partner cannot come after me and says, oh, you breached the contract, Yana, and I'll come after you now. Your mom has nothing to do with this contract because she's not part of this contract. So that's what they're referring to. So when they say the doctrine of privity, they're referring to any simple contract that does not involve two things. It does not apply to contract that has an interest in the land. So if you buy in a house, it's no more doctrine of privity, right? Or when you're trying to assign your contract to somebody else. We'll talk about the assignment in a minute, okay? But if any of those two things happen, then it becomes more complicated, right? And the doctrine of privity does not apply anymore. So for the exam, you have to know what is the doctrine of privity and when it does not apply. You might have a simple question, all they're going to ask you for, which one is not an option, right? It does not apply to the interest in the land. Or it does not apply where there's an assignment, which I'm going to explain what that is. So I look at it as a primitive contract, right? Simple contract, something that is, it's just simple stuff. And when you're selling the car to a person, then yeah, it's just two people involved. That's it. That's only those two people can sue each other, right? That's how it works. Simple, not simple. Doctrine of privity does not apply to something that is not simple. So let me explain you the last part, which is your assignments. We're going to talk about the assignments, not in just this chapter. This is just an introduction to the assignments, but you have 2 more chapters that you have to work on if you're doing your real estate course. If you're doing mortgage or if you're doing property management strata, then that's all you have to know about the assignments. So what is an assignment? I want to keep it as simple as possible, and I like stories. So if you owe money to Telus, okay? You sign a contract that you're going to use your telephone plan, and then you haven't paid it for months and months and months. And now you have a debt of $1,000 to Telus. And Telus has been trying to reach out to you. They tried to call you. They tried to send you the emails. They tried to send you reminders saying you owe us money, you owe us money. And you never paid them. And now they give up on you. Did it ever happen to you when suddenly, out of the blue, the debt collection is calling you, right? And say, hey, I'm coming after you now. Instead of Telus, I'm calling you and I'm trying to collect the money from you, right? It happened to me a couple of times. I guess I didn't even look at my bills, right? And suddenly the debt collection is calling me. I'm like, what? Right? So that's what's happening here. So basically, the Telus give up on the person and says, you know what? We don't want to deal with him anymore. We're not interested to try to collect this money anymore. We give up. So the Telus is the assignor. Why do they call him the assignor? Because he's assigning that debt to somebody else. And who is he assigning that to? He's assigning it to the third party, in this case, the debt collection agency, right? So that's what he's doing right now. But you are the promisor or obligor. On exam, they like to use a lot of fancy words. But why do they call you promisor or obligor? Because you are obligated, you had a contract with Telus, and you promise that you will be paying them, and you breach your promise, right? So obligor promisor is the person who owes money. Assignor, why do they call them assignor? Because they already quit on you, and now they assigning it to somebody else to collect the money from you. You get the point, right? And an assignee is somebody who will be collecting this money from the promisor. Lots of fancy words, right? Okay. So as a promisor, you sign a contract with Telus saying that you're going to pay them the money, okay? Consent is not needed to assign the debt. So if Telus wants to assign this debt of $1,000 to a collection agency, do they need to ask for his consent? Do they have to ask for his permission? Do you mind if we assign the debt to somebody else? Of course not. So consent is not needed. Cannot assign the debt. So basically, as a promisor, as a person who owes money, you're not allowed to say, Mom, can you take over my Telus bill? You can't just assign it to somebody. So liability, the debt cannot be assigned. But the benefits could be assigned. So Telus is the only one who can assign this $1,000 debt because he is the one who receives the benefits from this contract. Does it make sense? But just because you owe money, you cannot assign your money to somebody else, right? Whatever you owe to your mom owes money to the assignor. So that hopefully makes sense. Now, how about the assignee? So assignee now receives the rights and obligations under the contract, but wasn't a part of the original contract, which makes sense. So now the assignor said, okay, I'm giving you the debt. Now you're coming after the promisor, right? So can sue to enforce the benefits. So now the assignee has full rights to come after the promisor and sue him and get the money from him if he wants to. So for the exam, they want you to know, what can you assign? Can you assign the debt, or can you assign the benefits? What's the assignable thing? You cannot assign your debt, right? So this guy, you're not allowed to assign his debt, but you can always assign the benefits, right? So that's the assignor who has, okay, I'm receiving the benefits from this contract, I can assign them now, okay? And the third party can sue to enforce those benefits, but cannot assign away the liabilities. So just remember, liabilities is not something you can assign. Okay. Two types of the assignments. One of them is called the statutory assignment, and one of them is the equitable assignment. On exam, they're only going to ask you, what type of assignments do we have? They're not going to ask you for definitions or anything, but they will say what type of the assignment. Statutory and the equitable assignments. Statutory, I'm still going to explain you what that is. It's basically what just happened in this story, right? They have 3 legal requirements when it comes to statutory assignments. So basically, when TELUS, the assignor, wants to assign the debt to the other person, he needs to put it all in writing. Right? It says, I'm giving you rights now to come after the promisor. It has to be in writing. Number 2, if he wants to assign and says take over the debt, right, and then come after that person, he has to assign the full amount of that debt. Not partial, but full of it. That's statutory assignment. Right? So 2 things. Has to be in writing between assignor and assignee. That's a new contract here, basically. Has to be for the full amount. And now who has to notify who? Now the assignee will send a written notice to the promisor to tell him that, hey, I'm coming after you now. And that's why sometimes you receive these beautiful letters from the collection agency and they say, hey, I'm coming after you now. You're like, great. And now this is when you're going to receive 15 calls a day from them, right? So that's kind of how it works. So the assignment, just think of it this way. Can the doctrine of privity apply to the assignment? Yes or no? It does not apply to the assignment because, as you see, it's pretty complicated. There's more things involved. It's not primitive anymore. It's pretty complicated now, eh? So yeah, no doctrine of privity applies to the assignments, and it does not apply to the interest in the land. So that means no real estate transaction. Okay, good. So let's look at this example and you tell me what happens then. Okay, so this guy owes money to B and assigns it to C, right? So B is your TELUS, C is your collection agency. A owes B $1,000, right? That's to TELUS. B assigns the debt to C, that's the collection agency. For this to be a statutory assignment, 3 requirements are necessary. Which one of those following is not one of them? Okay, the assignment from B to C has to be for the entire amount. Yes or no? From TELUS to collection agency for the whole amount. Has to be. You cannot just give you a portion. The assignment from B to C must be in writing. From the TELUS to collection agency has to be in writing. Should be, right? The notification from collection agency to that person must be in writing, so they should notify you. But if you're not really sure about all that stuff, look at the last one. Notification from the A to B must be in writing. This guy, he owes money. He's a promisor, obligor. Does he have any obligation to notify B, which is the TELUS guys? Does he have to notify them about anything? I owe you money. Here's my written explanation why. So just remember, A will never have to notify anyone. He's the one that will be notified by everyone, but he doesn't need to notify anybody. Does it make sense? So I always look for the easy way out. So just look for that person who owes money, obligor, promisor, whatever they call them, right? He does not have to notify anyone. Okay, good job, right? So that's the 3 things has to happen. Question 21. An assignment terminates the original contract between the assignor and the third party. How does that sound to you? Does that sound like a good statement? Does that sound like a true statement here? Or does it sound like a false statement? I hope you said it's a false statement. Why? Because the assignment does not terminate between assignor and assignees. It's actually opposite because they created that assignment and says, hey, take over that debt. You now going to come after the promisor. But it terminates the original contract between the assignor, which is TELUS, and the promisor because now the TELUS says, I'm out. I'm out, right? So that's how it usually works in here. Okay, question 21, number 2. A person can assign both the benefits and the liabilities under the contract. Can you assign both benefits and the liabilities? Which one can you assign? You can only assign the benefits. Good, so not the liabilities. So that's a false statement. Okay. Number 3, due to the fact that assignments is an exception to the doctrine of privity of contract, the assignee, despite not being an original party to the contract, can enforce the properly assigned contract as if he or she was an original party to the contract. That's a long statement. Let's break it in parts. Due to the fact that the assignment is an exception to the doctrine of privity of the contract, okay, stop. Is the assignment an exception to the doctrine of privity? Yes, it is. Doctrine of privity does not handle the assignments. It has nothing to do with assignments or the interest in the land. Okay, so far so good. The assignee, which is your debt collection in this case, despite not being the original party to the contract, can enforce the properly assigned contract as if he or she was the original party to the contract. It's definitely a true statement because that's the point. He can come now after the promisor and he can sue him for that debt. Right? That's the point of it. Okay. Number 4, BC's Law and Equity Act prohibits assignments of contract which creates an interest in the land. Now, this is something we haven't taught you yet. It's coming up in the next few chapters. But basically, when you sell a house, right, and it has an interest in the land, of course, can you assign the contract to somebody else? And we had a lot of this flipping happening in British Columbia. And they started controlling it now, and they started putting the clauses into the contract of purchase and sale. Now it's actually in the form itself. It's stated in there what happens when you assign. But here it says it prohibits assignments in the contract of purchase and sales. That's not true. It does not prohibit. It limits you. It puts restrictions on this, but you still have the option to assign. Right? And we'll teach you that in the next few chapters. So that's it. Isn't that nice? We finally finished this chapter. It does have a lot of information, and I'm sorry for this, but this is the foundation of your exam. So this is this chapter and the next coming up chapters are very big for the exams, because that's where we start talking about the contracts, all the terms and doctrine of privacy, all the things like that will show up on the exam, and they will test you on this. So do your quizzes, and I will see you in the next chapter.